I was standing in my hangar at Scottsdale Airport in Arizona, staring at the empty space where my Robinson R44 helicopter should have been, when I realized that my carefully maintained relationship with our HOA president had just taken a catastrophic nosedive. The security footage on my phone showed everything I needed to know. Patricia Hendricks, dressed in what appeared to be a designer tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, had somehow bypassed the gate code at 6:30 that morning and walked straight up to my helicopter like she owned the place. My name is Marcus Webb, and I had made the mistake exactly 3 weeks ago of mentioning to Patricia during a neighborhood meeting that I kept a helicopter at the local airport. She had seemed fascinated, asking dozens of questions about flight times, fuel capacity, and whether it was difficult to learn. I had been flattered by her interest, stupidly thinking that maybe the HOA president was finally warming up to me after 2 years of nitpicking every single aspect of my property at 4782 Desert Vista Drive. I should have known better. Patricia had been a thorn in my side since the day I moved into Saguaro Springs, our gated community of 200 homes nestled in the foothills north of Scottsdale. She had cited me for having the wrong shade of beige on my mailbox. She had threatened fines because my desert landscaping included too many red rocks and not enough tan ones, according to some obscure subsection of the community guidelines that nobody else seemed to know existed. She had even tried to force me to remove the small fountain in my front yard because the sound of running water apparently violated the community's noise ordinance during daytime hours, which made absolutely no sense in a neighborhood where lawn services ran their equipment at 7 in the morning. But this was different. This was not about paint colors or landscaping rocks. This was about grand theft of a $400,000 aircraft, and I was about to make sure Patricia understood exactly how serious this was. I called the airport security office first, confirming what I already knew from the footage. Yes, someone had accessed my hangar. No, they did not know how she had obtained the access code. The security guard, a retired Air Force veteran named Tom, sounded genuinely apologetic as he explained that the woman had walked in with such confidence that the gate attendant assumed she had permission. She had even waved at the camera. "I am calling the police," I told Tom, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "And the FAA. She took off in my helicopter without a pilot's license, without permission, without filing a flight plan, and without any apparent concern for federal aviation regulations." Tom whistled low. "That is a whole lot of felonies wrapped up in one Joyride. Do you know where she went?" "No idea, but I am about to find out." I pulled up the tracking app on my phone, thanking my past self for installing a GPS tracker in the helicopter after a wave of aircraft thefts had hit Arizona airports the previous year. The little blue dot on my screen showed the helicopter moving north, away from Scottsdale, heading toward what looked like the Verde Valley area. I dialed 911, and within minutes, I was explaining the situation to a Scottsdale police dispatcher who sounded equally incredulous. Yes, the president of my homeowner association had stolen my helicopter. No, I did not give her permission. Yes, I was absolutely certain it was her. I sent them the security footage while I was still on the phone. "Sir, we are going to need you to file a report in person, and we will be contacting the Federal Aviation Administration immediately," the dispatcher said. "This is a federal crime, and it involves unauthorized operation of an aircraft. Can you tell me if the suspect has any flight training?" "Not that I am aware of," I said, watching the blue dot continue its journey north. "She is a real estate agent who spends most of her time harassing homeowners about fence heights and shrub trimming schedules. I have no idea how she even started the engine, let alone took off." The dispatcher assured me that units were being dispatched and that someone from the FAA would be contacting me shortly. I thanked her and immediately called my attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, who had helped me navigate several previous disputes with Patricia and the HOA board. Marcus, tell me you are joking, Rebecca said when I explained the situation. I wish I was. I am looking at live GPS tracking right now. She is flying my helicopter somewhere north of Phoenix, and she has been in the air for almost 40 minutes. Okay, this is way beyond HOA disputes and covenant violations, Rebecca said, and I could hear her typing rapidly in the background. This is criminal. Grand theft, unauthorized operation of an aircraft, possibly reckless endangerment depending on where she is flying and how low. The FAA is going to come down on her like a ton of bricks. Have you contacted them yet? The police said they were notifying them. Should I call directly? Yes, absolutely. Call the Phoenix Flight Standards District Office right now. I am going to start documenting everything on our end. Send me that security footage and any other evidence you have. We are going to bury her, Marcus. Legally speaking, of course. I found the number for the FAA office and called, reaching a duty officer who introduced himself as Inspector Dale Morrison. He listened to my explanation with professional calm, asking specific questions about the aircraft registration number, my pilot credentials, and Patricia's complete lack of authorization. Mr. Webb, we are tracking the aircraft now, Inspector Morrison said. I am going to be very direct with you. This is an extremely serious situation. Operating an aircraft without proper certification is a federal violation that carries significant penalties, including potential prison time. The fact that she apparently started the aircraft and took off suggests either prior flight training that she has not reported or exceptional recklessness. Either way, we are going to make sure she lands safely, and then we are going to have a very long conversation with Miss Hendricks about federal aviation regulations. Where is she now? I asked, pulling up my own tracking app again. The blue dot had stopped moving, hovering over what appeared to be a location near Sedona. The aircraft appears to have landed in an unauthorized area near the Red Rock State Park. We have contacted local authorities, and I am dispatching agents to the location now. Mr. Webb, I am going to need you to meet me at the Scottsdale Airport in 30 minutes. Bring all documentation related to the aircraft ownership, your pilot certification, and any evidence you have of the unauthorized access. I agreed and ended the call, my mind racing through the implications. Patricia had not just borrowed my helicopter for a quick spin around the neighborhood. She had flown it nearly 50 miles north and landed it in a state park, which was probably illegal on about 17 different levels. What was she thinking? What could possibly have motivated her to commit what amounted to a federal crime just for a joyride? My phone buzzed with a text message from my neighbor, Steve Patterson, who lived 3 doors down from me in Saguaro Springs. Dude, did you see the HOA email? Patricia is calling an emergency meeting tonight about community security concerns. What is that about? I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. Patricia was calling a meeting about security concerns while she was literally joyriding in my stolen helicopter. The audacity was almost impressive. I texted Steve back. Patricia stole my helicopter this morning. I am not joking. Police and FAA are involved. Save that email, we might need it. Steve's response was immediate. What? Are you serious? How did she even? Long story, I will explain later, but definitely go to that meeting tonight if she somehow makes it back. I want to hear what kind of security concerns she thinks are important. I drove to Scottsdale Airport, my mind churning through everything that had led to this moment. Patricia Hendricks had been HOA president for 3 years, elected after a contentious campaign where she had promised to restore property values and community standards to Saguaro Springs. In practice, this had meant an endless series of violations notices, special assessments, and increasingly petty enforcement of rules that seemed designed solely to make residents miserable. She had cited elderly Mrs. Chen for having a crack in her driveway that was barely visible. She had forced the Ramirez family to remove a basketball hoop that their kids used every evening. She had tried to ban holiday decorations after Thanksgiving, claiming they were visual pollution. The woman was a menace with a laminated copy of the CC and Articus, and now she had graduated to federal crimes. Inspector Morrison was waiting for me at the airport administrative building, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of serious expression that suggested he had seen plenty of aviation stupidity in his career. He shook my hand and gestured toward a small conference room. "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming in quickly. I have some updates for you. The aircraft has been secured on the ground near Sedona. Miss Hendricks was located with the helicopter and is currently being detained by deputies from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. Our agents are en route to the scene now, and she will be transported back to Phoenix for questioning." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by renewed anger. "Is my helicopter damaged?" From what we can tell from the initial inspection, the aircraft appears to be intact. "We will conduct a thorough examination before it is released back to you, but there are no obvious signs of damage. Miss Hendricks apparently landed in a meadow area that, while unauthorized and illegal, was at least relatively flat and clear of obstacles. How did she even know how to fly it?" I asked, spreading my hands in frustration. "I mean, starting a helicopter is not like turning a key in a car. There are procedures, checklists, safety protocols." Inspector Morrison pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me, showing what appeared to be a screenshot from a YouTube video. The title read, "Robinson R44 Startup Procedure Explained." "We found Miss Hendricks' iPad in the helicopter," he said dryly. She had apparently watched several instructional videos on helicopter operation. She also had a notepad with handwritten instructions on the startup sequence and basic flight controls. I stared at the screen, genuinely speechless for a moment. She YouTubed how to steal my helicopter. That appears to be the case. Obviously, watching videos does not constitute proper flight training, and her actions endangered herself and anyone on the ground below her flight path. But it does explain how she managed to get the aircraft started and airborne, however illegally and recklessly. Inspector Morrison asked me detailed questions about my interaction with Patricia, the security at the hangar, and how she might have obtained the access codes. I explained about the neighborhood meeting where I had mentioned the helicopter, though I was certain I had never discussed specific details about its location or security. She must have followed me, I realized aloud. Or maybe she asked around. The community is small enough that someone might have mentioned I keep it at Scottsdale Airport. And the access codes, she could have watched me enter them if she was surveilling the hangar. That suggests premeditation, Inspector Morrison noted, making notes on his tablet. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. She planned this, researched the procedures, and executed the theft with some degree of forethought. That is going to be relevant when charges are filed. "What charges is she facing?" I asked. Inspector Morrison ticked them off on his fingers. "Theft of an aircraft, which is a federal felony under Title 18, Section 32. Unauthorized operation of an aircraft without proper certification, which violates multiple FAR's, Federal Aviation Regulations. Reckless operation, given her complete lack of training. Potentially trespassing and landing violations related to the state park. The U.S. Attorney's Office will determine the exact charges, but Miss Hendricks is looking at significant federal penalties. We are talking potential prison time, not just fines." "Good," I said, and I meant it. She has spent years making everyone's life miserable over mailbox colors and landscaping rocks. Maybe some actual consequences will teach her that she does not get to do whatever she wants. Inspector Morrison gave me a thin smile. "I have been doing this job for 22 years, Mr. Webb. I have seen people do incredibly stupid things with aircraft, but I have to say, a homeowner association president stealing a helicopter for a joyride to Sedona is a new one for me. We will need you to come to the Phoenix office tomorrow to provide a formal statement. In the meantime, You should coordinate with the Scottsdale Police Department on the local theft report. I left the airport and drove straight to the Scottsdale Police Department, where I spent another hour providing a detailed statement to a detective who seemed both amused and appalled by the situation. She assured me that they were coordinating with federal authorities and that Patricia would be facing charges on multiple levels. "The thing is," Detective Sarah Kim said as she reviewed my statement, "HOA disputes usually involve small claims court, maybe some civil lawsuits over covenant violations. They do not involve federal aviation crimes." What was she thinking? "I honestly have no idea," I said. "Patricia has always been controlling and petty, but this is insane even by her standards." Detective Kim nodded thoughtfully. "We will be looking into whether she has any history of this kind of behavior. Sometimes people escalate, and there are warning signs that get missed. In the meantime, you might want to check with your insurance company about the helicopter. Even though it has been recovered, there may be issues related to the unauthorized use." I thanked her and left, my phone buzzing with messages from neighbors in Saguaro Springs. Word had apparently spread about Patricia's arrest, and the community was in an uproar. The HOA email about the emergency meeting had been followed by a cryptic cancellation notice, which had only fueled speculation and gossip. I called Steve Patterson back, and he answered on the first ring. "Marcus, what the hell is happening? Someone said Patricia got arrested in Sedona. Someone else said it had something to do with your helicopter. The neighborhood is going crazy with rumors." "It is all true," I said. "Patricia stole my helicopter this morning, flew it to Sedona without a pilot's license, and got caught by the FAA and local police. She is facing federal charges." Steve was silent for a long moment. "That is the most insane thing I have ever heard. Why would she do that?" "I have no idea." "Midlife crisis. Control issues taken to a criminal extreme? Your guess is as good as mine, but she is in serious trouble now. The FAA does not mess around with unauthorized aircraft operation." "Dude, the HOA board is going to implode," Steve said. "Patricia basically is the board. She bullies the other members into voting however she wants. If she is gone, the whole power structure falls apart." "Good riddance," I said. "Maybe we can get some sane people in charge who understand that homeowner associations are supposed to maintain common areas and handle insurance, not play dictator over every single aspect of people's property." That evening, I sat in my home office, reviewing emails and documentation related to the theft. Rebecca Chen had sent me a detailed email outlining our legal options, including potential civil suits for damages, emotional distress, and the cost of the security review I would need to conduct at the hangar. She also noted that the publicity from Patricia's arrest might finally give us leverage to challenge some of the HOA's more ridiculous rules and enforcement practices. My phone rang, showing an unknown number with a Phoenix area code. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Webb, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Larson. I am with the District of Arizona, and I have been assigned to the case involving Patricia Hendricks and the theft of your helicopter. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Yes, of course," I said, sitting up straighter. "I have reviewed the initial reports from the FAA and local law enforcement, and I want you to know that we are taking this case very seriously. Miss Hendricks is currently in federal custody, and she will be arraigned tomorrow morning on charges of aircraft theft and unauthorized operation of an aircraft. Given the nature of the crimes and the potential flight risk, we will be arguing for detention pending trial." "Flight risk," I said. "That is almost funny, given the circumstances." Attorney Larson gave a dry chuckle. "The irony was not lost on me either. Mr. Webb, I am going to need you to provide testimony, potentially at trial if this case proceeds that far. The evidence is quite strong, including security footage, GPS tracking data, and the fact that Miss Hendricks was literally caught sitting in your helicopter when authorities arrived." But your first-hand account of the lack of permission and her history of behavior will be important context. Whatever you need, I said. She crossed a line and I want to make sure there are real consequences. There will be, Attorney Larson assured me. Aircraft theft is a federal felony with a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. The unauthorized operation charges carry additional penalties. Even with a plea deal which her attorney will almost certainly pursue, Miss Hendricks is looking at significant prison time and substantial fines. Her life as she knows it is over. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my office, processing everything that had happened. This morning, my biggest concern had been a routine maintenance check on the helicopter's transmission. Now, I was involved in a federal criminal case against the president of my homeowner association, a woman who had apparently decided that the rules she loved to enforce on everyone else did not apply to her. The next morning, I drove to the Sandra Day O'Connor United States Courthouse in downtown Phoenix for Patricia's arraignment. Rebecca Chen met me outside, along with Inspector Morrison from the FAA. This should be relatively quick, Rebecca explained as we went through security. The arraignment is just where they formally present the charges and determine bail or detention, but I thought you might want to see this. The courtroom was small, with only a handful of people in attendance. Patricia was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her usually immaculate blonde hair disheveled and her face pale. She looked over at me once, her expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame, before looking away. The magistrate judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Carolyn Foster, reviewed the charges with crisp efficiency. Patricia's court-appointed attorney, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, argued weakly for release on bond, citing her ties to the community and lack of prior criminal record. Assistant U.S. Attorney Larson demolished that argument in about 30 seconds. Your Honor, the defendant stole a $400,000 aircraft and operated it illegally across state airspace, demonstrating a clear disregard for federal law and public safety. She researched how to steal and operate the helicopter over a period of weeks, showing premeditation and planning. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated federal crime. Given her demonstrated ability to steal aircraft, she poses a significant flight risk in the most literal sense. Judge Foster did not look amused. She set bail at $250,000, with conditions including GPS monitoring, surrender of her passport, and prohibition from going within 500 feet of any airport or airfield. Miss Hendricks, Judge Foster said, looking directly at Patricia. I have presided over many cases in my years on the bench, but I must say that this is one of the more baffling examples of criminal behavior I have encountered. You are a professional woman, a leader in your community, with no prior record. And yet you chose to steal a helicopter and fly it illegally across Arizona, endangering yourself and potentially dozens of people on the ground. I sincerely hope you take this opportunity to reflect on the magnitude of your actions and the consequences you now face. Preliminary hearing is set for 3 weeks from today. Patricia nodded mutely, and she was led out of the courtroom. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and something almost like pity. She had spent so long being the petty tyrant of Saguaro Springs that she had apparently lost all perspective on reality and consequences. Outside the courthouse, Inspector Morrison shook my hand. Your helicopter has been cleared for release. We have completed our examination, and aside from some higher than normal engine hours from the unauthorized flight, everything appears to be in order. You can pick it up from the Sedona airport where we moved it for secure storage. Thank you, I said. And thank you for taking this seriously. A lot of people might have just brushed this off as a weird civil dispute. Mr. Webb, aviation safety is not negotiable. When someone operates an aircraft without proper training and certification, they are not just breaking rules. They are endangering lives. If Miss Hendricks had crashed that helicopter, she could have killed herself and anyone unlucky enough to be underneath her. We do not take that lightly, and neither should anyone else. Rebecca and I got coffee at a small cafe near the courthouse, and she walked me through what would happen next. Patricia would likely try to negotiate a plea deal to avoid trial, but given the severity of the charges and the clear evidence, she would not have much leverage. The federal conviction would mean prison time, probation after release, and a permanent criminal record that would destroy her real estate career. What about the HOA? I asked. Can she still serve as president while facing federal charges? Rebecca grinned. That is the beautiful part. I already checked the Saguaro Springs CC and Arteques. Board members must maintain good standing in the community, which specifically includes not being under indictment for criminal activity. You can file a complaint with the board to have her removed immediately, and they have to comply or face potential liability. I am drafting the paperwork now. Do it, I said. And then we are going to push for a complete review of the HOA's enforcement practices over the past 3 years. Every violation she issued, every fine she imposed, every petty little rule she enforced. If she was abusing her power as president, I want it exposed. Over the next few weeks, Saguaro Springs underwent a transformation. With Patricia removed as president and facing federal charges, the remaining board members scrambled to distance themselves from her actions. An emergency election was held, and a retired accountant named Martin Torres was voted in as the new president. His first act was to establish a review committee to examine HOA enforcement practices and covenant interpretations. The results were damning. Patricia had issued over 300 violation notices in 3 years, more than 4 times the number issued by previous boards over similar periods. Many of the violations were based on her personal interpretations of vague covenant language, interpretations that had no basis in the actual text or the original intent of the community guidelines. She had also funneled HOA contracts to her friends and business associates, creating potential conflicts of interest that bordered on embezzlement. Steve Patterson, who volunteered for the review committee, called me one evening with updates. "Marcus, it is worse than we thought." Patricia was basically running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. She had vendors overcharging for services and kicking back payments to her through her real estate company. We found at least $40,000 in questionable transactions. We are turning everything over to the Scottsdale police for investigation. So, in addition to federal aviation crimes, she might be facing fraud and embezzlement charges, I asked. Looks that way. The woman had a serious problem with power and control. Stealing your helicopter might have been the most dramatic example, but it was part of a whole pattern of believing she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. Patricia's preliminary hearing came and went, with the judge finding sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Her attorney immediately began plea negotiations, but Attorney Larson held firm on significant prison time as part of any deal. The case attracted local media attention, with Phoenix news stations running segments about the HOA president helicopter heist, as one station branded it. I gave a couple of interviews, keeping my comments measured and focused on the facts. Yes, Patricia had stolen my helicopter. Yes, she had been arrested and charged with federal crimes. Yes, this had revealed broader problems with HOA governance in Saguaro Springs. No, I did not know what had motivated her to do something so reckless and illegal. 3 months after the theft, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to aircraft theft and unauthorized operation, and in exchange, the U.S. attorney agreed to recommend a sentence of 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She also agreed to pay full restitution for all costs associated with the theft, including my attorney fees, the FAA's investigation costs, and penalties for the aviation violations. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a warm morning in June. I sat in the courtroom with Rebecca, watching as Patricia stood before Judge Foster. She had aged visibly in the past few months, her face drawn and her eyes red-rimmed. "Miss Hendricks," Judge Foster began, "you have pleaded guilty to serious federal crimes. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to address the court?" Patricia nodded, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Your Honor, I know that what I did was wrong. I know that I endangered people and broke federal laws. I have spent the past months trying to understand how I let my life spiral so far out of control. I think I became so obsessed with control, with enforcing rules and maintaining order in the HOA, that I lost sight of reality. When Mr. Webb mentioned his helicopter, something in me just snapped. I wanted to do something spontaneous, something that broke all the rules I spent so much time enforcing on others. I wanted to feel free, but I know that is not an excuse. I hurt people, I broke the law, and I deserve to be punished." Judge Foster listened impassively. "Miss Hendricks, I appreciate your acknowledgement of responsibility. However, your actions were not a momentary lapse in judgment or a minor violation of rules. You committed a serious federal crime that endangered your life and the lives of others. You abused your position of trust in your community, and as we have learned through additional investigations, you engaged in a pattern of misconduct extending well beyond the helicopter theft. While I am accepting the plea agreement as negotiated, I want to be clear that this sentence reflects the gravity of your crimes. You are sentenced to 4 years in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $187,000 to cover all costs associated with your crimes. You are permanently prohibited from serving in any leadership position in a homeowner association or similar organization. I hope that your time in prison gives you the opportunity to genuinely reflect on your actions and make better choices in the future." Patricia was led away, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. She would face real consequences for what she had done, and Saguaro Springs could finally move forward without her toxic leadership. In the months that followed, the new HOA board implemented sweeping reforms. Violation notices now required approval from at least 2 board members, with clear documentation of the specific covenant violation and photographic evidence. Homeowners were given 30 days to address issues before fines could be imposed, and an appeals process was established for disputed violations. The board also commissioned an independent audit of HOA finances, which uncovered the full extent of Patricia's financial misconduct and led to additional restitution orders. My helicopter was returned to me undamaged, and I installed additional security measures at the hangar, including biometric locks and enhanced camera coverage. I also started flying more often, taking trips throughout Arizona and appreciating the freedom and perspective that came with being above it all, literally and figuratively. Steve Patterson and I became good friends through the whole ordeal, bonding over our shared experiences with Patricia's tyranny and our relief at her removal. We started a homeowners' rights group in Saguaro Springs, focused on ensuring that the HOA served the community rather than controlling it. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Steve said one evening as we sat on my back patio looking out at the desert sunset. "Patricia could have just asked you for a ride in the helicopter. You probably would have said yes. Instead, she committed a federal crime, destroyed her career, lost her freedom, and ended up in prison. All because she could not stand the idea of following rules or asking permission. Some people are just wired that way," I said. "They spend so long enforcing control on others that they do not know how to exist without it. And when that control becomes their entire identity, they will do anything to maintain it, even things that are completely irrational and self-destructive." "Well, at least something good came out of it," Steve said. "The HOA is actually functional now. Martin is doing a great job as president, and people are not living in fear of getting violation notices for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailboxes. I raised my beer in a toast. To functional HOAs, reformed governance, and never letting Patricia Hendricks near an aircraft again. Steve clinked his bottle against mine. I will definitely drink to that. The story could have ended there, with Patricia in prison and the community moving forward. But there was one final twist that occurred about 8 months after the sentencing. I received a letter from Patricia, forwarded through Rebecca Chen, who had screened it first to make sure it was not threatening or inappropriate. The letter was handwritten on plain prison stationery, and Patricia's normally immaculate handwriting was shaky and uncertain. She wrote about her experiences in federal prison, the therapy she was receiving, and her slowly dawning realization of how distorted her thinking had become. She apologized, not with excuses or justifications, but with what seemed like genuine remorse. "Mr. Webb," she wrote, "I know that no apology can undo the harm I caused you. I stole your property, violated your trust, and created enormous stress and expense in your life. I have spent months in therapy trying to understand how I became the person who could do such things. What I have learned is that I spent years building my entire identity around control and power, using the HOA as a vehicle to make myself feel important and necessary. When you mentioned your helicopter, I became obsessed with the idea of taking it, not because I actually wanted to fly or see Sedona, but because it represented the ultimate act of control. I could take something valuable from someone I had been unable to fully control through HOA rules. It made no logical sense, but my thinking had become so distorted that it felt perfectly rational at the time. I am not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how sick my behavior was, and that I am working every day to become a better person. I hope that you have been able to move forward with your life, and that the helicopter brings you joy rather than reminding you of my terrible actions." I read the letter twice, then filed it away in the folder with all the other documentation from the case. I did not respond, because I was not sure what I would say. Patricia had destroyed her own life through her actions, and while I could acknowledge her apparent growth and remorse, I was not obligated to absolve her or engage with her rehabilitation. But I did think about the letter sometimes when I flew, looking down at the Arizona landscape stretching out below. I thought about how easy it is for people to lose perspective when they have power over others, even the relatively small power of an HOA president. I thought about how communities function best when leadership serves rather than controls, and how important it is to have checks and balances even in small organizations. A year after Patricia's sentencing, Saguaro Springs held its annual community meeting. Martin Torres presented the board's accomplishments over the past year, including a 30% reduction in violation notices, the implementation of new transparency measures for HOA finances, and the creation of community events that actually brought neighbors together rather than pitting them against each other over covenant violations. "I think it is fair to say," Martin told the assembled homeowners, "that we have turned a corner as a community. We have learned some hard lessons about governance, accountability, and the importance of serving homeowners rather than controlling them. I want to thank everyone who has participated in our reform efforts, and I want to especially acknowledge Marcus Webb, whose terrible experience with our former president helped expose problems that needed to be addressed. Marcus, would you like to say anything?" I stood up, a bit self-conscious about being singled out. "I just want to say that I appreciate the work everyone has done to make this community what it is supposed to be, a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. What happened with Patricia was extreme and bizarre, but it highlighted problems that exist in a lot of HOAs across the country. When we give people power without accountability, when we let enforcement become more important than community, we create environments where abuse thrives. I am glad we are moving in a better direction, and I hope other communities can learn from our experience without having to go through their own helicopter theft incident. There was laughter and applause, and the meeting moved on to discussions of pool maintenance and landscaping contracts. Normal, boring HOA business, handled by reasonable people focused on practical concerns rather than petty tyranny. 2 years after the theft, I was flying back from a trip to Flagstaff when I passed over the meadow near Sedona where Patricia had landed my helicopter. From the air, it looked peaceful and beautiful, the red rocks glowing in the late afternoon sun. It was hard to believe that this serene landscape had been the site of such a bizarre criminal act. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered how she was doing in federal prison, and whether she would really change when she was released. I thought about the hundreds of homeowners she had harassed over the years, and whether any of them felt the same mixture of satisfaction and sadness that I felt about her downfall. Mostly, though, I just flew, enjoying the freedom and perspective that came with being above it all. The final chapter of the story came 3.5 years after the theft. Patricia was released from federal prison, having served her full sentence with no early release. I only knew because Rebecca Chen called to let me know, in case I wanted to take any precautions or be aware of her return to Arizona. She is being released to a halfway house in Phoenix, Rebecca explained. Her supervised release conditions prohibit her from contacting you or coming within 1,000 feet of your property. She is also permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership role, and her real estate license was revoked. Basically, she is starting over from scratch. Good luck to her, I said, and I meant it without sarcasm. I hope she actually learned something and can build a better life. You are more generous than I would be, Rebecca said, but I think your attitude is healthy. Holding on to anger just poisons you, not the person you are angry at. I never saw Patricia again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to Tucson, working as an administrative assistant and trying to rebuild her life quietly. The story of the HOA president who stole a helicopter became local legend in Scottsdale, a cautionary tale told at community meetings and social gatherings. Saguaro Springs continued to thrive under reformed governance. Martin Torres served 2 terms as president before stepping down and being replaced by a retired teacher named Deanne Sullivan, who maintained the community-focused approach that had replaced Patricia's authoritarian style. Violation notices remained rare, focused on genuine issues like major property damage or safety hazards, rather than petty aesthetic complaints. The community became known as one of the better-run HOAs in the Scottsdale area, a place where people actually enjoyed living rather than enduring constant harassment. As for me, I continued flying, exploring Arizona from above and appreciating the freedom that came with it. I never forgot the surreal morning when I discovered my helicopter had been stolen by the HOA president, or the months of legal proceedings that followed. But I also did not let it define me or poison my relationship with the community. 5 years after the theft, I was invited to speak at a statewide conference on HOA governance and reform. I stood in front of a few hundred people, board members and homeowners from communities across Arizona, and told the story of what had happened. The theft of my helicopter was extreme, I said, but the underlying problem was not. Patricia Hendricks was not a uniquely evil person. She was someone who was given power without adequate accountability and who gradually became more focused on control than service. That can happen in any HOA, in any organization, when we do not have proper checks and balances. The lesson from my experience is not that you need to watch out for helicopter thieves, though that is probably good advice too. The lesson is that HOA boards need transparency, accountability, and a genuine focus on serving the community rather than controlling it. When we get those things right, communities thrive. When we get them wrong, we create environments where abuse flourishes and good people get hurt. The presentation was well received. and several communities reached out afterward to ask for advice on implementing reforms. I worked with Rebecca Chen to develop a set of best practices and model policies that HOAs could adopt, focusing on transparency, homeowner rights, and limiting the potential for abuse of power. It felt good to turn something negative into something that could help other people avoid similar problems. On the 6th anniversary of the theft, I took my helicopter up for a sunset flight over the desert. I flew north toward Sedona, passing over the familiar landscape of saguaro cacti, red rocks, and endless sky. As I approached the meadow where Patricia had landed all those years ago, I thought about how much had changed. Patricia had served her time and was rebuilding her life. Saguaro Springs had transformed from a community ruled by fear and petty tyranny into a genuine neighborhood where people looked out for each other. I had turned a bizarre and stressful experience into advocacy work that was making a difference for homeowners across the state. Sometimes the worst experiences in life become catalysts for positive change, if we are willing to learn from them and work to make things better. I circled over the meadow once, a private acknowledgement of everything that had happened, then turned south toward home. The sun was setting behind me, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. Below, I could see the lights of Phoenix beginning to glow in the gathering dusk, thousands of homes and communities where people were living their lives, hopefully in places where HOAs served rather than controlled. I thought about the young couple who had just moved into Patricia's old house in Saguaro Springs, the one she had lost in bankruptcy proceedings after her criminal conviction. They had no idea of the drama that had unfolded before they arrived. They just knew that they had moved into a friendly community with a reasonable HOA, where they could paint their mailbox whatever shade of beige they preferred and plant whatever rocks they wanted in their desert landscaping. That was how it should be. As I flew back toward Scottsdale Airport, I felt a deep sense of peace. The helicopter that Patricia had stolen for her, Bizarre Joyride, had become a symbol of freedom and perspective for me, a reminder that there was a whole world above the petty disputes and power games of daily life. I had been lucky in a strange way. Yes, I had gone through the stress and expense of dealing with a federal crime, but I had also learned important lessons about community, power, and the importance of standing up for what was right. I landed at Scottsdale Airport as the last light faded from the sky, securing the helicopter in its hangar and making sure all the new security measures were engaged. Tomorrow, I would fly again, exploring new destinations and continuing to appreciate the gift of flight. Tonight, I would go home to Saguaro Springs, to a community that had been through fire and come out stronger on the other side. The story of the HOA president who stole my helicopter would always be a bizarre and memorable chapter of my life. But it was just one chapter, and I had many more to write. Patricia Hendricks had tried to exert control through theft and federal crimes, and she had destroyed her own life in the process. The real victory was not her punishment, though justice had certainly been served. The real victory was the positive change that came afterward, the reform of a broken system and the creation of a better community for everyone. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Saguaro Springs, I passed houses where families were settling in for the evening, where people were living their lives without fear of arbitrary violation notices or petty harassment. I passed the community pool where kids splashed and played without worrying about noise ordinances. I passed mailboxes in every conceivable shade of beige, and nobody cared because color variations were not actually threats to property values or community standards. I pulled into my driveway, looking at the fountain in my front yard that Patricia had once tried to force me to remove. It bubbled peacefully in the evening air, a small symbol of freedom and the right to enjoy your own property without unreasonable interference. The water caught the light from my porch, creating small rainbows in the spray. Inside, I poured myself a drink and sat on my back patio, looking out at the desert landscape I had grown to love. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, the same stars I navigated by when flying at night. Somewhere out there, Patricia Hendricks was trying to rebuild her life after destroying it through her own actions. I wished her well, genuinely, because holding on to anger served no purpose. But I also knew that her story, our story, would continue to serve as a warning and a lesson for others. Power without accountability corrupts, even the small power of an HOA president. Communities thrive when leadership serves rather than controls. And sometimes, the most bizarre and dramatic events become catalysts for positive change that benefits everyone. The helicopter incident had taught me that justice matters, that standing up for your rights matters, and that good people working together can reform broken systems. Those lessons had value far beyond the specific circumstances of Patricia's crime. They were truths that applied to every community, every organization, every situation where people had power over others. As I sat in the peaceful evening, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, as strange as that seemed. Yes, having your helicopter stolen by the HOA president was a nightmare. Yes, the months of legal proceedings and investigations had been stressful and expensive, but the outcome had been worth it. A toxic leader was removed. A community was reformed. Hundreds of homeowners were freed from arbitrary tyranny. And I had learned that standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and scary, made a real difference. The night settled over Scottsdale, cool and quiet. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new flights, new opportunities to appreciate the freedom that Patricia had tried to steal along with my helicopter. But tonight, I was content to sit in my backyard, in my community, in the home I had fought to protect from unreasonable interference, and simply be grateful for how far we had all come. The story of the HOA president and the helicopter would be told and retold, becoming legend and cautionary tale. But for me, it was simply one chapter in a larger story about community, justice, and the importance of holding leaders accountable. It was a reminder that ordinary people, standing up for their rights and working together for positive change, could overcome even the most bizarre and challenging circumstances. And as I finished my drink and headed inside for the night, I knew that tomorrow I would wake up, check on my helicopter, and take to the skies once again, flying free above the desert landscape, grateful for the journey that had brought me here and hopeful for all the flights yet to come.